About 60 metres from our company's position, the course of the Volga River had created a slough at a bend in the river channel. The Germans occupied one side of this little slough, and we the other. Here our lines were within spitting distance of each other. It probably would have been more expedient if one side or the other had yielded and withdrawn from this narrow projection of water. But neither our command nor the enemy's showed any desire to blink first. However, by some unspoken agreement among the men, the opposing sides here didn't bother each other. When they informed me of my assignment as the new commander of this nasty sector of the front line, I didn't celebrate. It meant I would have to leave my company, to which I had become accustomed, and the friendships I had formed with the men in it. But an order is an order. On the 30th of December, we warmly said our farewells, and I shook hands with each man. I had learned about my new assignment that morning. That afternoon, I received the most valuable gift a man can get at the front, and a New Year's gift at that. It was a letter from Mamma. She had sent it from Kishtim on the 10th of December, probably with the hope that I would receive it by New Year's. Her wish was fulfilled, and now I was reading the letter over and over again. My dear son, what a fine fellow you are for not forgetting about us. Each one of your letters is a holiday for us. In the morning, I catch sight of Shura, our mail carrier, through the window. A good, kind woman. She walks up with her large mail pouch, which hides so much inside it, both joy and just as much grief. She pulls a familiar triangular-shaped letter out of her pouch, and we sit at the table. I fill a bowl of soup for her. I put on my glasses and read your letter in a loud voice. Shura is somewhat deaf. She listens, eats her soup, and cries. Her husband is at the front. She has received nothing from him since 1941. In the evening, I read your letter to your father over the telephone. He spends weeks at his office without coming home. The industrial complex is growing. Soon its output, and you know what it is, will be going to its destination. Forgive me for passing along some sad news. You get enough of that there. My sister Fanechka has passed away. We cut off a few locks of her lovely curls as a keepsake. We buried Fanechka in Kishtim. I congratulate you on the approaching new year. May it be happy and victorious for us all. Take care of yourself, my dear son, but understand me correctly. I am not asking you to duck the demands of the army. But remember, you have a weak throat. Don't smoke in the cold. Try not to drink any cold water. In your childhood, you were often sick with angina. Take more steam baths. God forbid that anything leads you down the wrong path. I remember the year 1921. I was serving then in the Red Army's 12th Army. It was advancing on Warsaw, but suddenly in Novograd-Volinsk I fell ill with typhus, and they left me in a local hospital to die. There were good people there. They nursed me back to health and found some work for me. At the time, we all lived according to the proletarian principle. Whoever doesn't work, doesn't eat. In that quaint and green little city, I met your future papa. I was only 17 then. I had still not completely gotten over my illness, but ever since my childhood I had loved the theatre and took part in local productions. At the City Club, we put on some revolutionary play. I don't remember its name. Your future papa came to the show and, like everybody else, loudly applauded our performance. We became acquainted that evening. We began to meet and fell in love with each other. What your father found so special in me, I don't know. I was still weak, frail, and my hair hadn't grown back in yet. He's a romantic, just like you. We got married. Time passed, and you appeared. Novograd-Volinsk. There we first met, and there you were born. Isn't that fate? Fate is a blue bird, which brought all three of us happiness. I believe that this bird will protect you now. Yesterday evening I bumped into the director of the plant, where you started work as a lathe operator. He asked to pass along his regards to you. With every passing day they are increasing their production. Natasha often spends time with us. She has a new son. She calls him Andrei, in honour of his father. She painted your portrait from your last photograph as a civilian. I've hung it in the dining hall and never get tired of looking at you. Natasha told me how her pilot husband was killed in the first days of the war. He had just fastened himself into the cockpit of an airplane and was about to take off, but never managed to do it. The German airplanes pounced. They found him dead in his destroyed airplane. I kiss you, my dear son, your mother. Close to evening on the 30th of December, I took over my new company. It had 36 men and 2 officers. I first got acquainted with the officers. One of them, Lieutenant Gorbanov, had temporarily been the acting commander of the company. The second, Junior Lieutenant WWII, commanded a platoon. I already knew that Gorbanov had survived a stretch in the penal battalion, had been wounded and then restored to his former rank. That meant he had fully atoned for his guilt, but what his transgression was, I didn't know. He made a good impression on me. He was a strong guy of short stature. WWII was out of a completely different mould. He was very young, not even 19. He had recently graduated from the Omsk Combat Infantry Specialist School, and from there went directly to the front. It was clear that he had not yet been under fire. He was somewhat frail, and it seemed to me he did not have a very stable personality. He still didn't feel fully in command, and he didn't understand people well. He couldn't tell me very much about his men. Understanding his own weaknesses, he was a nervous man prone to breakdowns. After our conversation, we took a tour of all the positions in the trenches. I cursorily made the acquaintance of the soldiers and managed to have a brief chat with only 2 or 3 of them. "Have you ever been in an attack?" I asked one. "All kinds of attacks," he answered. "It's good when the German buggers off when we attack, then it's everyone forward. If he doesn't, we leap into his trenches and have at him with the bayonet, the snake. Then Fritz comes to his senses and tries to chuck us out. If we don't have artillery support, we retreat, but as long as we have one heavy gun helping us, we kick the shit out of him. You've been in an attack and survived. Good man." It didn't turn out that way for everyone. Apparently a trustworthy soldier, I thought. You can't go wrong with someone like him. This conversation calmed me down, but all the same I decided that the next morning I had to study the personnel files, change the company's routines, and urgently put my system in place. For the meantime, I asked Gorbunov and WWII to visit all the posts at night. I returned to my command dugout. Extreme fatigue drew me to my bunk. Tomorrow was the last day of 1942. I'd spent a full year in the army. How naive and stupid we had been to believe that the war would soon end. Now I knew that with patriotism and a rifle alone, you couldn't take the enemy. I thought back to my arrival at the specialist school a year ago. The empty barracks, WWII, his songs with the guitar. How many of us were still alive? Yet, nevertheless, tomorrow, without fail, I'd greet the new year with the soldiers, and we'd organise a fitting salute. Just then, the junior lieutenant burst into my dugout like a whirlwind. His face was pale, his coat was unfastened, and he wasn't wearing his fur cap. I immediately understood that something serious had happened. "Comrade Company Commander!" he almost shouted. "It's a disaster! A terrible disaster! A desertion! 2 of them! One of the old guys and a new conscript!" I sprang to my feet. Sleep disappeared in a flash. We rushed into the trench. 2 fully operational and well-maintained rifles and a Komsomol card were lying neatly on the breastworks, lightly powdered with snow. It seems I had met these, I couldn't bring myself to say the words, now former soldiers. They had greeted me affably when I had come by their post. Where were they from? How and where had they fought? What were their names? I knew nothing about them. The old soldier must have persuaded the new conscript, the Komsomol member. The latter, I suddenly remembered, had been whining about something, probably as a diversion. It seems he was saying he hadn't been paid in 3 months. Yes, my inner voice had misled me. I looked at the abandoned rifles and suddenly felt queasy. A group flight, that meant the penal battalion. It had to be that way. We quickly got organised. Lieutenant Gorbanov hurried out with a group of men. I left the dugout last, moving along with WWII and 2 soldiers. But I realised that even the fastest pursuit could not reach the deserters in time. On the way back to my dugout, I met a familiar, almost dear face in the dark. He was a soldier from my company. He was hiding behind a bent tree. I greeted him warmly, but he took off at once. I stopped and stared after him. "Drink up, Comsorg! You did your duty honourably, and I can see you're frozen." I tasted cognac for the first time. I could feel the warmth of the noble drink spreading through my body. I forgot about my angry tirades and suddenly felt very sleepy. I hadn't slept the previous 2 nights. But Ivan Yakovlevich detained me. Apparently, trying to justify his behaviour, he began to talk. "My family has perished. I met Lydia Nikolaevna a long time ago, and we fell in love. If we're lucky enough to survive to the end of this war, we're going to get married." Fate turned out otherwise. In 1943, Gruzdev was sent to the Military Political Academy in Moscow. He graduated as a lieutenant colonel, acquired a new family, his frontline love was forgotten, and moved to Ivanovo to serve. In the 1970s, we met each other again in Moscow when he and his wife came for the Victory Day celebrations. But back in the dugout, as I prepared to leave, Gruzdev suddenly asked, "Do you at least know what Lenin said at the Third Komsomol Congress? What the Komsomol's main tasks are as the party's top assistant? What honours the Komsomol has earned? What the 5 primary features of the patriotic war are, as formulated by Comrade Stalin? Are these things really important for a Komsomol member to know as he heads into battle?" I asked. "It is important, first of all, for you to know. You are now a leader of young men and women. Have I made myself clear?" My new home was a small, cosy dugout in the political unit. Everyone greeted me in a friendly fashion. We exchanged greetings as we were supposed to do. There were 3 of us in the dugout: the regiment's party organiser, the regiment's political agitator, and me. "Make yourself comfortable. Here's your refuge now," they said, gesturing at an empty bunk. I guessed that just 2 weeks ago this had been Tolia Razumov's place. As I approached the bunk to drop my stuff onto it, I noticed a small trunk beneath it. I figured it must have been Tolia's, but I didn't ask about it. Usually for the position of a regiment's Komsorg, a young communist was selected from among the officer political workers. But here they had chosen a combat commander who was not even a party member yet. Power corrupts. I witnessed how some officers, upon receiving a promotion to a higher rank, sharply changed their behaviour, showing arrogance, insolence, even cynicism. Their kindness disappeared, and for the sake of their careers they forgot about their comrades, with whom just the day before they had been eating from the same pot of food or drinking their 100 grams of vodka from the same mug. So I tried to watch myself so as not to break my own inner code of decency. I rubbed shoulders with the men in the ranks and tried to sense their moods, since as a platoon leader and company commander, I had become convinced that the combat spirit of people depended largely on their mood and emotional state. To support a person, to listen to their every word attentively, these I saw as my primary tasks as Komsorg. Before one battle, I was talking with a young soldier, and I asked him, "When will you turn in your application for the Komsomol?" In response, I heard, "You want to make a Komsomol member of me, Komsorg? You dream of giving me a membership card? I have all of 3 hours left to live before we attack. So, Comrade Lieutenant, you'd better find someone else." The soldier's reply rattled me, and I couldn't regain my composure for a long time. Our regiment commander liked to say, "I would like to kiss every soldier and officer in my command, because they are fighting for our families back home." But why should anyone want to kiss him back? Every day he was sending hundreds, even thousands of men to their doom. I had serious divergences with him here. One day, an Osobist called the political unit and asked to meet with me. You couldn't expect anything good from these people. We had a conversation. "Do you know, Lieutenant, the Komsomol member Abram Rosenfeld?" "I've heard of him." "It seems he deliberately shot himself in the foot. They exposed his crime at the Medsenbat, and he has confessed. There is a report from the company commander. We intended to turn the matter over to a tribunal, but for political reasons we came to a different decision. Commissar Borisov recommended that we speak with you. We want you to have a chat with Rosenfeld. Try and find out whether this scum intends to fight honourably, and then let us know." I decided to get Gruzdev's advice on this matter. He, as always, passed the buck. Borisov has made a recommendation, so now go do it. I summoned Abram to the political unit. We were alone. First of all, I asked him, "Is it true what your company commander, the doctors, and the osobists are saying and writing?" He confirmed everything. He swore never to do such a thing again, and explained, "My nerves simply gave out." I asked him to tell me about himself, where he was from, and how he wound up at the front. Back in his childhood, he had discovered that he had the gift of art. In 1940, he enrolled in the Architectural Institute in Moscow. During the hard days around Moscow in the autumn of 1941, the Institute's Komsorg had proposed that the entire group of students who had not yet been called into the army should volunteer for the front. Within a few weeks, they were given uniforms and weapons and sent to the distant approaches to Moscow. Almost everyone was killed in the ensuing battle. He and 2 other students wound up in a hospital and then were sent back to the front. I understand that as a Jew, I have a special responsibility. I must fight not only for our motherland and for myself, but also for my people, who Hitler is destroying. You understand correctly, I affirmed, but you walked away from your responsibility. Do you know, Abram, what awaits those men who intentionally wound themselves? I know. Please call me a brash, like everybody calls me. If you permit, I'd like to speak openly. You've summoned me as a Komsomol member, and I trust you. Of course. I'm from Vinnytsia. There were a lot of Jews in this city before the war, and all the Jewish families observed the religious traditions and spoke Yiddish. Sholem Aleichem wrote about it in his stories. It's a classic of Yiddish literature, which is highly regarded in our country and around the world. Perhaps you've heard of him? No, Abrash, unfortunately I haven't read him. Read it, you won't regret it. I studied in a Yiddish school and attended the synagogue on Saturdays. In Vinnytsia and in Moscow, nobody ever criticized me for this. At the front, especially in the front lines, I can't observe the Jewish traditions. But this company commander who wrote the report nastily insulted me in front of my comrades and even promised to send me in front of a tribunal. Why? I had asked him to release me from sentry duty on a Saturday. I wanted to pray for Mama and Papa. He shouted at me, "Does this mean you don't want to fight on Saturdays? Oh, you! You yourself understand what kind of stuff," he then said to me. He beat me unmercifully. I didn't cry. I only said, "How are you, Soviet officer, any better than the fascists?" He became enraged and promised to deal with me. I became angered and indignant after hearing what Abram had told his commanding officer. I said to him, "The company commander treated you impermissibly and insulted your national feelings. But you're a fine one. To compare an officer of the Red Army with Hitler's executioners, that's blasphemy." At this point, I lost all control of myself. Instead of a discussion, I suddenly lashed out at Abrash, knocked him off his feet, and threw him out of the dugout. For the first time in my life, I had raised my hand against another man. How could I have behaved that way? Was that any way to treat a Komsomol member? It was a loathsome act. What kind of leader of youth could I be after that? For several days, I walked around completely out of sorts. Now and then, I wanted to seek out Abrash at the front, to seek his forgiveness, for the devil knows what he might be thinking about me now. I thought over what I could do, about how I might defend a Komsomol member from his company commander, who was also an anti-Semite and a dull-witted man. But I never offered a defence for him. There was only one thing left for me to do. I secured Abrash's transfer to a different battalion. One day, an ageing soldier with tired, sad eyes approached me, and in a single breath he poured out an entire cascade of short phrases. There was anguish and alarm in his voice, and agonizing tears in his eyes. "I'm a Leningrader, the docent of the Gertsen Pedagogical Institute, the author of many well-known books and articles about Gorky, our stormy petrel of revolution. I'm 44. There's a lot I can do and want to do. I have a wife and 2 kids. They're right now in the blockaded city. They are dying, just like all Leningraders. They're starving to death." I gently responded, "Forgive me. What's your question?" I saw tears welling in his eyes behind his glasses, and he asked, "Please, get me out of the front lines. I'm ready for any duty, even a transport driver." What could I say? But he continued, "Oh God, if I'm killed, who can give a better lecture on Stalin's favourite story? The old woman Isagil than me? What do you think? Perhaps we should write a letter to Comrade Stalin. He'll understand me better than all of you."